Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
It's Lindsay Smith-Rogers. Today, food waste. Dana Gunders, a scientist and president of ReFed, a nonprofit that works to reduce loss and waste across the food system, talks to Stephanie Desmon about the vast quantities of food wasted in the U.S. and how to reduce that. Gunders talks about the impacts on climate, from the water and energy that goes into growing and getting the food to the store to the high levels of methane gas emitted by food tossed into landfills. Let's listen. Dana Gunders, welcome to Public Health on Call.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, Stephanie.
So our topic today is food waste. You were one of the first to sort of raise the alarm about how much food is wasted and the impacts on environment, economy, and food security. So I guess the big question is, how much food are we wasting?
Yeah, well, it's not something we think about very often in our days, but we waste about 30% plus of our food in the food system. I mean, imagine going to the grocery store and leaving with 3 bags, dropping one in the parking lot, and not stopping to pick it up. That's essentially what we are doing across our food system today. And it's happening everywhere. It's happening, on farms because the produce is not exactly the right color or shape or size or ripeness. It's happening in grocery stores when food expires, even though it's actually still perfectly good to eat. It's happening in restaurants because we get these huge portions and leave some on our plate. And it's certainly happening in homes as well.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about sort of the environmental cost, something I think that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't think about it, and yet actually it takes a huge amount of resources to grow food, harvest it, store it, cook it, and get it to our tables. And so when we step back and look at all of that food that's going to waste, we estimate that it uses as much water as every American taking 7 showers a day. That's how much water we're talking about. It takes up as much land. If you were to grow all that food in one place, it would take a farm the size of New York and California combined. And then, of course, there is the climate impact, which is over 50 million cars worth of greenhouse gas emissions that come from food going to waste. And I know that it's not an obvious connection, right? We think about cars and we think about energy use and things when we think about climate. But in fact, between all the land that it takes up and all of the resources it takes to grow food, get it to our tables, when we throw out food and it goes to landfills, it actually rots there and produces methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. And actually, landfills are the 3rd largest source of methane in the US, and food is producing almost 60% of the methane that's coming from landfills. So it's really a big climate emissions producer there as well.
So those are all incredible statistics, actually, that I hadn't really thought about before. You kind of break it down like solutions, like how do you fix food waste? And I thought the most interesting one to me was prevention. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, a lot of times when I tell people I work on food waste, they immediately start to tell me how they compost or what their feelings are about compost or how once upon a time they tried to compost and it didn't work and all of that. And composting is a very important thing to do with food that cannot be eaten, right? It does avoid that methane in the landfills. However, it doesn't avoid all of the resources it took to get food there, which is actually a much bigger part of food's footprint and the footprint of food waste. And so really the best thing that we can do is to not have extra food in the first place. Then it's kind of like the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra in plastics. It's like, first, let's not have too much food around. And then if we have it, okay, let's find a way for people to eat it. If not people, animals. If not animals, all right, then let's think about composting and things like that.
So what can people do, and are we doing enough?
Yeah, well, we certainly are not doing enough. Back in 2015, the US joined many other countries in a goal to cut our food waste in half by 2030. And our most recent analysis shows that after that goal was set, food waste continued to go up in the country until about 2019. It had a little dip during the pandemic and then has now come up and is about at the same levels as it was in 2016, right when that goal was set. So we have a very long way to go towards that goal and so much more we could do. And I think the thing about this issue is there's so much that is really kind of simple and straightforward. This is not rocket science. It's really about managing our food better. And it's something we can do today. So many climate solutions are technologies that need to be developed and, in 10 years we'll get somewhere. And, if you don't throw food out today, that's food that doesn't go to the landfill tomorrow and doesn't produce methane, in a week or two. And so it's a very immediate opportunity to take action.
So how do we do it?
Yeah, so many things. So I will say one of the best ways is to, as people, and I should have mentioned, we as consumers, households, are actually the largest source of food going to waste. And so if we don't do it in our own homes, we will never make a real dent in this issue if we don't kind of get a handle on that. Some of the easy things that can be done. The first is really to try to plan your food better. And I know plan can be kind of a 4-letter word these days, but if you are somebody who is a good planner and can really just think a little bit ahead, we're not talking about sitting at home with a cookbook for 2 hours on Sunday night. It's really just about okay, how many nights am I going to be home? Am I going to have time to cook on those nights? We're just going to have pasta this night, frozen pizza the next night, and leftovers following that, right? It can be really easy, but just taking the time to plan, really look what's in your fridge, see what's there, and use a shopping list can make a big difference. If you're not someone who plans, then you need to get really good at the sort of coping strategies. And those are freezing food. So our freezers are kind of a magic pause button, and they don't have to be long-term storage. They can be short-term storage. Put those leftovers in there for a week or two, and you'll be really excited to have them later. There's so many things that can be frozen that we don't think about. Bread, milk, cheese. If you're going away this summer and, there's all this stuff in your fridge, just try popping everything in the freezer and see what happens when you get back. That's kind of what I like to do. So freezing food, really great strategy. Having nights where you just cook up a meal with what's left over. Some people call it Waste Less Wednesday. Some people call it Stir Fridays. You can do it with tacos. You can do it with soup. You can do it with stir fries. But having that meal where you're like, okay, this is the day we're just going to kind of use everything up, is also a really good strategy. And another is really understanding what those dates on food mean. So, those use by, best by, sell by, enjoy by dates, they cause a lot of confusion. And often people think that they are telling them that the food is no longer good to eat, or at least that the manufacturer is telling them the food is no longer good to eat. In fact, those dates are not federally regulated. They typically are a manufacturer's best guess of when the food will be at its top quality. And they're really not meant to talk about the safety of food at all. And so for most foods, they can safely be eaten well after those dates as long as the food, looks fine, smells fine, and tastes fine. There are kind of a subset of foods where there is a safety indication related to those dates. The trick is we don't really know. There's nothing to tell us when that's the case. So my rule of thumb is that for foods that they tell pregnant women to avoid, those are the foods that, you want to be a little more careful with the date. But if you see the words best by on a product, you can almost surely eat that food past that date.
Are there policies that we could put in place that could help with this problem?
Certainly there are. One that we are working pretty hard on right now is to get some kind of standardization behind those food date labels, because once a more standardized system is in place, we can be much more clear and do a lot more education on what the different dates mean when you see this word or that word. So that's one, and it actually has been introduced to Congress several times, and we expect it will again this year. Another is restricting or banning food from going to landfills. So there are actually 12 states, that's a state level law, and there are now 12 states that have some kind of restriction of food going to landfill. In places like Massachusetts and California, they have pretty aggressive goals where they have, alongside their waste collection, rolled out these public collection of food waste separately, and it's typically going to composted or to energy production.
And also, there are ways that sort of we can track our own waste, I understand.
Tracking waste has actually been shown to be quite effective in helping you reduce it. One of my favorite statistics is that 75% of Americans say they waste less than the average American. And I think what that tells us is that we don't see it, right? We don't see it in our own lives. And if you talk to anybody, I have these conversations all the time where people are like, oh my gosh, I don't waste food. We do not waste food in my house. And they tell me, but then you do something with them or you're at their house and you're like, okay, right? And you see it, but they don't. And so what measurement and tracking does is it really helps you see it. Actually, there's a product called Mill that is like a fancy, bin that it's like an appliance that you can put in your house, collects food waste scraps and then dehydrates them so that they can go to compost or other uses, but it also measures, right? And it gives you a report back. It's actually developed by the people who developed the Nest thermostat. And that act of measurement, they have found, because they're tracking all this data, right, that as soon as people start using this and getting these reports back, actually their waste drops significantly. You don't need a fancy appliance though to do that. Times, if you just keep a little journal for a week of everything you're throwing out, you really start to see how much you are throwing out and what, and you can think about why and what you might do differently in your own life. I know in my life, I have an 8 and 10-year-old, and I can guarantee what we throw out most is what comes home in their lunch boxes. And so I really had to come up with strategies to, take the carrots they didn't eat and chop them up and throw them into dinner and things like that.
And compost is a good solution for some of this.
It absolutely is, right? It is the best thing to do with the scraps that we can't eat. I just don't want people to think like there is sort of a guilt alleviation when you compost food, and it's a great thing. It's far better than putting something in the landfill. It helps recycle nutrients. It builds our soil up. It actually helps soil retain water better. So it has a lot of benefits, but it's not why we put all this energy into growing food and having it travel the whole journey it travels to get to us. And all of that does go to waste, even when you compost the food.
I mean, that energy component is really fascinating because I think that a lot of us don't think about all of the water, all of the power, all of the gasoline that goes into getting this food to the market. And as you said, if we can reduce what we waste, then we can reduce all of those things on the front end.
Right, exactly. And, another component of this is the land use, right? Agriculture takes up more land than any other activity on the planet. The UN predicts that in 2050, we will need at least 50% more food than we had in 2010 to feed that population. And the question is, where is that food going to come from? Are we going to cut down more rainforests and more native grasslands and convert them to agriculture, which is one of the primary drivers of natural ecosystem conversion that's happening right now? Or are we going to use the food that we already are growing to really meet those food needs? And so, creating systems and behaviors that streamline the use of our food now can really help with that land use, in addition to all of the gasoline, all of the fertilizer, and everything else that goes into growing our food.
Dana Gunders, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmon. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Michael Bonfils, Spencer Greer, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production coordination by Catherine Ricardo. Analytics by Elisa Rosen. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.